Aloha and welcome to this session of Shadow the Scientist. My name is Jamika Marshall, and I am absolutely pleased to serve as the coordinator for the Shadow the Scientist initiative, which is an initiative housed under the Creating Equity in STEAM, or CREST, umbrella of initiatives offered by a team at the University of California, Santa Cruz. The JOIDES Resolution is a seagoing research vessel that drills core samples and collects measurements from under the ocean floor, which provides scientists with a glimpse into Earth's development. JOIDES is an acronym that represents the original partnerships of universities that sought to explore geology beneath the ocean floor. Now, today, the ship is used by hundreds of scientists from around the world.
Hello, my name is Carolyn Moss. I'm the outreach officer for the night shift. So I just started my shift because it is midnight here. So I work midnight to noon. And yeah, I will be your tour guide today.
Well, we are so grateful to have you as our guide, and I appreciate you and the crew allowing us to shadow your work for about an hour today to see what it's like to live aboard a research vessel doing amazing science. So we are ready for your guidance whenever you'd like to begin.
Perfect. Okay. Well, as Shamika said, this is the JOIDES Resolution. We are part of Expedition 401. So we're one of the last expeditions for the JOIDES Resolution. And this expedition is working in the Atlantic and Mediterranean Gateway Exchange. So we started up in Amsterdam and we made our way around Portugal. And we just passed through Spain through the Gibraltar Strait. And now we are in the Mediterranean Sea. We're here for about 10 more days, and then we stop in Italy and end our expedition. So what our science party is looking at is they are looking at the Mediterranean Sea because 8 million years ago, the Mediterranean Sea dried up and the seawater that was left there evaporated and left these things called the evaporites. And left a giant sheet of salt that we call it salt giant. And so 3 million years after that, we had a outflow. So the Atlantic Ocean flooded the Mediterranean Sea again into what we see today. So what the science party is looking at is they are looking at the sediment, the mud, the rock from the Atlantic and the Mediterranean to compare it to see the ocean currents from that time period to better understand the climate change today. So as our climate is warming and changing, our ocean currents are changing, the ice caps are melting, and it's changing the way our ocean circulation works. And so we're looking back in the past so that we can see our future. So that is the goals of this expedition. It's going to take about 10 years because we're also working on land. So this is the first ever land to sea drilling. So they are drilling in the ocean, and then hopefully in the next 10 years, we'll be drilling on the coast of Spain and Morocco, because 8 million years ago, the water flow from the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic had 3 gateways. Right now, there's only 1. So we need to look at the sediment on land too, to compare the sediment and get a better idea of the ocean. So it's all very exciting. Currently, I'm on the bridge. So the bridge is like the penthouse. It's the top deck. So let me show you a little map here. This is what the JOIDES Resolution looks like. It's 141 or 143 meters long. And this is something called the science stack right here. This is where all of our labs are. So we have, I believe there's 7 decks. So we're at the very top. The very bottom deck is where all of our core goes. So we don't even really go there. So the science stack is only this small section of the boat. This section is where all of our engines and the drilling is. So even though it's a long boat, we really only stay right here. We're only on about 3 of the floors. So it's it seems like there's a lot of space, but actually it's even smaller than that. So we started this meeting at midnight, our time, which is right when the shift change happens. So a lot of the scientists are in a crossover meeting. So right now our co-chiefs are talking to the physical properties team. So I'm gonna go by and say hello, but we won't be able to talk very long because they're having a meeting. So hi, Rachel.
Hello, do you want to come and say hello?
Yes, I would love to say hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Would you like to say anything, Rachel?
Hello. Welcome to Expedition 401. We are currently in the Mediterranean. We are actually sitting here around today looking at data from one of our sites in the Atlantic. So, yes, lots of wiggly lines. Trying to make sense of the data.
Perfect. Thank you. Enjoy your
tour.
meeting. All right, it's nighttime, but I'm gonna try and show you outside. It's a bit louder out here, so I'll try my best to speak up. I believe Aaron gave you tours during the day, so you might be able to see this a bit better. But this is the derrick. So our derrick is 62 meters long. So from the very, very top to the ocean floor is 62 meters. So our ship is about half as tall as it is long. So right now we're not drilling, but you can still see our drill pipe right here. So this pipe goes all the way down from the very top, all the way down to the ocean floor. And it's quite loud. It is quite loud. But normally during the daytime, we get a fantastic view. Right now it's just pitch black. But I promise you, the view is spectacular. I promise you, you can see Spain in the distance. And it's gorgeous and wonderful. We've seen a lot of whales recently. Yesterday, we saw a whole pod of pilot whales. And they were just swimming right next to the boat. They were so curious about what we were doing. They're just swimming in circles around us. We've also seen dolphins a ton. And tuna, which I didn't expect to see tuna, but we've seen huge tuna. And they've just been swimming at the surface. It's amazing. It's fantastic. But unfortunately, it's nighttime, so I can't show you anything over there. So I'm gonna head closer to the derrick. We're about to cross a danger zone. So I need my hard hat and my safety glasses. If you get too close, you do need something. You need steel toe boots. We're not gonna get that close because it's loud, but that's another thing that you have to, another safety equipment you have to bring. So here is the drill floor. So you can see some of our workers here, the drill pipes heading down. So we have a worker here, 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 here. The drill floor is always full of people working very hard for us. And you can see one of our drill machines. I believe this is part of our heave compensator, but we're not drilling right now. So we don't need it attached yet. Yeah, they're working very hard for us. Right now we're having a little bit of technical problems, so they are troubleshooting some stuff for us. They are so amazing. Let's see some of your questions. You asked how often does drilling occur? So we pull a core roughly every hour and a half. So when we're actually drilling, every hour and a half we're bringing up mud. It's incredible. Sometimes it's a bit slower, but for the most part, it's pretty quick. It's about roughly 2 hours. So all of the sounds, okay, so all of the sounds, there's so many sounds happening right now. You can hear the drill, the engines are running, and the drill is heading down. So you can hear an engine bringing it down, and you can hear them drilling things together, them clanking metal together. It's incredibly noisy out here. So there's something that they have that sort of sounds like an elephant. Hopefully you get to hear it. It is a very iconic sound for drilling.
So of course, Zoom does a terrific job of filtering sounds out. So we are hearing a very filtered version.
Oh, are you? Fantastic. Great, because it is very loud on my end. So I never know what it sounds like to you all.
I mean, I assume this is the case for Jamaica, Elias, and Fonny. I'm not hearing a very loud, and I'm hearing you very clearly. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. I'm Raja.
Ellen, nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you, Ellen.
That's great. I'm glad that it's not super noisy for you all because I can barely hear it. So I can barely hear any of you. So I'm glad that it doesn't sound like that for you. I'm going to try and get out of here so that I can hear you. So once they bring up the core from here, the science techs, they all... There was that noise.
That sounded like an elephant, yeah.
Yes. So once they bring up the core, the sediment, they techs line up and they carry out these 10-meter long plastic tubes out onto this table. This is called the catwalk. And so these long tubes get laid out on this table and they get cut into 1.5-meter sections roughly using a blade in here. So this goes around in a circle and you have a blue cap for the sky, the top, and a white cap for the sand, the bottom. So we got them into 1.5 meters and they get brought inside for all of the experiments. Yeah, the last thing out here is our drill bits that I can show you. So this is what a normal drill bit looks like. So this is what they would use when they're looking for oil and gas, but this is what we use. So we have a hole in the center and that's how we get all of our mud from the ocean. So we have 2 of them. We have this one, which is a little bit smaller, and this one's a little bit bigger. So the smaller one is something called piston coring. So we take basically a metal tube and we shove it into the earth as hard as we can, and then we pull it out. So it's sort of like when you stick a straw in a milkshake and you pull that straw out and there's still milkshake in there, that's what you're doing. And the other one uses rotary. So it spins these parts right here to sort of ground up the harder rock so that it turns it into sort of like a slurry so that we can pull it out much easier. We try not to use that one if we can because it makes our sediments sort of mixed and mushed, and we don't want that if we can avoid it. So that's our catwalk. Once we have our core, we're gonna bring it inside. So I'm gonna lead you inside. We have all these really heavy steel doors, and they require some finessing when opening because if they hit you too hard, they can really hurt you. Okay, so once the cores come inside, they immediately go in here, which is a laser engraver. So we have a little laser-eyed kitty that comes and engraves all of our cores. So we start with 8 engraves with our expedition, scientific pole, and core number. And it goes onto this shelf. So you can sort of see it right here. It's engraved, but we also have a sticker. So our sticker, this is our expedition, our site, and our core number. There's also a little scanner, so when you scan it, it also tells you the date and all of the other information that you might need. It's incredibly organized, and it has to be. It has to be. What we're doing is so important, you can't mess it up. So once it's engraved, it sits on that shelf for 5 hours to get up to temperature before we can actually do any of our experiments. But after 5 hours, the first lab to look at our core is the physical properties team. So they are right next to it. So our physical properties team uses whole cores. So they take the entire core part and they run 3 tests over here. So this one uses gamma rays. So they're using this to look at the inside of the core before we have to cut it open. This one tests for magnetic susceptibility. And this one uses sound waves to see how sound travels between the core. We also have a thermal conductivity machine, but that one comes later. They have many tests that they run. They also have a natural gamma ray test. They have the most to do for sure. And it's never all at once. So they have to constantly come back and forth and back and forth. But they're all in meetings, so unfortunately I can't have them give you a display, but that's all right. Once they do all of their whole core rounds, we're going to move into the splitting room. So splitting room is where we split them in half into a working half and an archive half. So the working half is what the scientists work on, and the archive half gets archived. Very simple.
We need to split them in half. You don't get to choose how they're split. They just get split however they get put on the table. For softer sediments, we use something that sort of looks like a cheese wire. And for harder sediments, we use a saw blade. Once they're cut in half, they get washed down to get rid of any plastic residue, any sort of mushed up mud, and we want to keep it nice and smooth for the sedimentologists. I'm hoping that they are done with their crossover meeting, so I can grab one of them to talk about what they do. Yes, it looks like they are. Danielle? Not today? Okay. This is lovely Danielle. She's one of our sedimentologists. Would you mind telling me a bit about what sedimentologists do?
Sure. So start over here at the description table and draw the course on the table based on our observations with our eyes, and we just take note of the different colors, the different grain sizes, different fossils we can see in pores, and then we image all of the pores. Here. And this takes very high resolution images of the pores that we can keep on a permanent record. And we can look at these later if we miss some very detailed descriptions. We can zoom in and take note of things. And then we use this instrument here to get the magnetic susceptibility of the rocks and the quantitative color data. So sometimes the changes between the lithologies are really gradual. So looking at the different quantitative color data can help us to see when the colors are really changing.
Thank you. Someone wants to know how many cores have been collected so far.
How many cores have been collected? At this point, we have drilled about 3,300 meters of core, and each core is about 10 meters if you have good recovery. So 300,
Yeah.
300 something at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
we describe about 6 cores a day if it's a good day.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
So yeah, we've described a lot of cores so far. The sedimentologists they're working so hard. Some days the core is so interesting that you only get to describe 2 a day. And some days they power through it and they get through 8. So the other day we had some really, really interesting core, and they were doing about 2 cores a day. It was incredible. Something else that's over here is we have a sampling table. So this is the working half, and that's the archive half. So the archive half gets described for future use, and the sampling half is what the scientists actually work with. So you can see a sample was taken from here, and from here we place little styrofoam pieces in there so that things don't get smushed back together. So we know this is a sample was taken from here. Sample was taken from here. Everything also gets documented into an Excel sheet, so that when you look at your working half pieces, you can say who took that sample and what was it that they saw. That was so important. Yeah, so after the sedimentologist, we move on to the PMAG. So you might be able to hear it. It sort of sounds like a chirping noise, like a cricket, and that's their machine. So their machine tests for magnets. So all of our cores have little dust particles that can be magnetic. And so what this team is looking at is they're seeing which way the magnets are facing. So we have this lovely chart here. So black is one way and white is the other. So a long time ago, our poles used to be a different direction. So our poles are constantly flipping back and forth. And so black is when the North Pole is north and white is when the North Pole is south. And so from this, we can see how old our core is based on which way our poles are facing. Incredibly interesting. Another team that talks about age is our microfossil lab. Unfortunately, everyone is at their meetings today, so I can't grab another one. But what they are looking at is nanofossils in the back and microforaminifera, so planktonic. So they have all these collections of images to reference, and of course, their own images to reference here. So the sedimentologists, they look at grain size at about 14 times, but the microfossil lab looks at sediment at 100 or 1,000 times. So the nanofossils, nano is really, really tiny. So they're looking at about 1,000 times magnification. And the planktonic, they're looking at 100 to 1,000. So yeah, so they're looking at these teeny, teeny, tiny little dust particles in here. This is actually a pretty large example. A lot of them, it just looks like dust in these little jars. It's incredible. They use a little paintbrush to pick out all of the little fossils and place them in containers. It's quite amazing to see. Yeah. So I'm gonna head down to our chem lab because that's everything on the core lab floor. The chem lab, they get a extra big lab because they're doing so many different tools and they use so much fancy equipment. Check your questions real quick. How are the samples divided among the researchers? So, the scientists, they come in with a certain amount of samples requested. So for instance, Danielle that you spoke to earlier, she's requesting about 60 samples per site. So she'll be leaving with 240 samples roughly. But one of our other scientists on the day shift, Simon George, he is looking to take over 1,000 samples. He's looking to take as many as he can get, basically. It all sort of depends on how much money you have to run your tests back at home. If you don't have a lot of money, you don't get a lot of samples. So, yeah. Aaron said archive portions are taken to a place in Germany. Yes. How long does it take to get them there before they're opened? So they sit in the archive for, I believe, at least a year, minimum 8 months before anyone is really allowed to look at them again or request anything again, because the scientists that are doing work on the ship, they get priority. So if 6 months from now, the scientists aboard are wanting, oh, actually this section from this core, I really wanted to see that again. Can I get a sample of that? They can request it and they get priority so that they can finish their papers. So it sits in archive for a while before anything else happens. And the room is, there's a lot of special things about it. So there's another repository in Texas, in College Station. And I've been there, it's freezing in there. It's basically a giant freezer. But it's a giant warehouse. Everything is incredibly meticulously labeled. It's just stacks and stacks and stacks of cores, and it's freezing cold in there. Yeah, they do all kinds of special things in there for it. Yeah, so I'm gonna head down to the chem lab. Their crossover meetings are usually much shorter. They're very organized people. So, and we have. Hi, Sarah. Would you like to explain what you do in the chem lab?
Yeah, who am I talking to?
This is the Shadow the Scientists group. So it's all ages.
Okay.
All
right.
From all over the place. So.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. This is the Chem Lab on board the JOIDES Resolution. I'm an organic geochemist in my lab back at USC. Here on ship, also an organic geochemist, but with slightly different things that I do here. One of the things that we do is every time a core comes up on deck, we take a sediment sample. We pop it immediately in the oven for half an hour, and what that does is it cooks the lighter hydrocarbons out of the sediments into the headspace above. We then take a syringe and we take the headspace out of the vial and we inject it into this instrument, which is called a gas chromatograph. So this instrument will tell us the concentration and amount of different gases. So on the screen here, you can see a few peaks. That is the methane peak. That is the same stuff that comes out of the stove, your gas stoves at home. So it's a flammable gas. And so that's why we're measuring it, because there are naturally methane is naturally released from sediments as the microbes munch on the organic matter that's in the sediment. So we get methane in there, And when we're drilling, we just need to make sure that the methane levels aren't too high. So we monitor for that. Everything's been all safe and fine, but obviously it's an important job on board. Once we've got the sediments, we freeze dry them, we grind them, and then we extract out different chemical signatures. So on board the ship here, we measure the carbonate content. Lots of marine organisms, for example, have carbonate skeletons, and so that is recorded in the sediments. And we measure the organic carbon content on board. And then back in my lab, I'll be extracting the lipids. Those lipids comes from things, so fats, comes from organisms living in the water column, as well as things that are washing in from land. And from that, we can reconstruct, for example, what the temperature of the ocean is like. I've got another colleague over here. She's the inorganic geochemist. Maybe that would be.
Someone's curious what the freeze dry process is.
Oh, okay, sure. I can show you that. Let's go around here. Okay, this big box down here is part of the freeze dryer, and these containers up here are where the samples sit. So you can see that we've got about 3 bags in that one and a couple more bags in there. And what we do is we pull a vacuum, and then we use sublimation. So the samples are slightly wet. There's no air in there, and the water is going to migrate from the sample onto the cold surface. If you take a little look into that window there, you'll see the ice freezing onto the coils. So that's really cool. You have to make sure that you have a good vacuum for that process to work. You have to use a pump to pull out all the air, and then it works really nicely. I have one of those in my lab as well. And so that's typically what we need to do is extract the water so that then we can grind up the sediments into a powder, and then we'll run it on different instruments. This instrument right here, we drop down tiny little samples into there, and it's actually running right now. So I'm not sure if I have any. Oh, yep, I do. In these little wells, there is a small little bit of foil that is bundled up very tight that contains a packet of sediment. That little packet of sediment is wrapped in tin. When it drops down there in an environment with oxygen, the tin combusts. It's a very exothermic reaction, so you may actually see a little glow up here. If you look through there, you can actually see the glow right now. And the sample has already dropped down. And what you're seeing here is the sample, the CO2 from the sample coming off. So we can measure the carbon content and the nitrogen content in that instrument. So that's running right now. This instrument we ran yesterday, it was bubbling and fizzing away. And what we were doing there was using acid. The acid's in this bottle here. The acid goes into the sample, and then the CO2 bubbles off. We measure that when there's all the equipment there. And that tells us how much carbonate, just like you can drip vinegar onto a rock and it fizzes, you can see whether it's a carbonate. We do the same thing, but we catch the CO2 very effectively so we can measure the calcium carbonate content. And that seems to be everybody's favorite data on board, so everybody's eagerly awaiting that. So that has been delivered. And we'll hand you over to Clara.
Hi. One of the other things that we do in this lab is we can measure the waters that are sitting in between the grains of sediments. We call these interstitial waters or pore fluids. And the way we do that is by taking some sediment out of the core and we squeeze it under very high pressure. We can put some sediment in here. We put this piston on top and we press it, and then the water will come out this little hole and we'll collect it in a syringe. And we can measure some of the chemistry of those waters, which tell us about how the sediments are aging and degrading and reacting as they get buried over millions of years.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. That should be the end of the tour. We're going to head into the conference room to answer any of your questions. And I saw that you have been asking questions as we go, so hopefully we can answer some of those as well. Wherever you want to sit is fine. Our conference room is set up for ping pong right now, so it's a bit of a mess. So yeah,
I'll sit behind you.
sounds good.
Did you say it's set up for ping pong?
Yes, it's set up for ping pong.
Yeah,
I'm
after,
an
12,
avid ping
know,
pong
actually-
player myself. So I wish I could be on the ship.
But have you ever played on a ship that moves?
I know that
Sometimes you
must-
hit the ball and
Yeah.
it doesn't go the right way because the whole ship is moved.
Yeah, I was going
And
to
it's
say
very
that.
important after a 13-hour shift that we can get into a ping pong battle with each other sometimes.
That's
So-
very important. You know, most I'm an astronomer, and most observatories have ping pong tables, and there the challenge is playing at altitude. You know, oxygen deprived and all that. You know, so. But I can imagine playing pool or billiards on a ship must be super difficult.
Yeah.
I don't think you could. I mean,
Don't
some
think
days it was so wavy that our plates were sliding off the table.
Wow.
But we're in
wow.
the Mediterranean now and everything is very calm, but we are going to be getting winds from the east in a couple of days, and so we'll get some more waves. I saw a question in the chat from the person that asked me about the freeze dryer. So the instrument that I showed you where I was talking about the gases, that's a gas chromatograph. So we cook the sediments, we take the headspace and we inject it into that gas chromatograph. And what happens is the gases from the syringe travel through a straw and they travel all the way to the detector. The detector basically burns whatever comes in and we see how much we have. So we saw that peak of methane, a little peak of ethane, and a little peak of propane. So that GC, I have a GC very much like that in my lab. What's inside of it, the straw, that column is actually designed for measuring those really volatile gases. And what I do is measure the bigger molecules. So methane is C1, ethane is C2, propane is C3. And in my lab, I measure mostly things that are C29, 31, 33. So they're much higher boiling point compounds. They come off around 200, 300 degrees Celsius in the oven. And so the column that I have is different. It's designed to hold on to those molecules and measure those higher boiling point compounds. But I could very easily swap out the column and use that one for what I do at USC as well. And then there are some different detectors you can put on the end. So I have one that's like that, but also has a mass spectrometer. So we can actually blow apart molecules and see what they are. And I also have one that's attached to an isotope ratio mass spectrometer. So I can measure hydrocarbons contain carbon and hydrogen. So the two elements on the periodic table that I study are carbon isotopes, stable isotopes, and stable hydrogen isotopes. The carbon isotopes tell me about the vegetation type. So I can record, for example, tropical grasses use the C4 pathway, and trees and all other grasses use the C3 pathway, which is just the standard Kelvin cycle. And so I can tell the difference isotopically. And hydrogen isotopes tell me about rainfall. I'm quite a simple geochemist. I only work on 2 elements on the periodic table. Clara works on many elements, so I learn a lot from working with Clara in the lab.
We all have different specialized instruments that are tailored to measure different kinds of properties. Yeah.
John? Yeah, please. One of the questions was, what is it like to work at night?
Okay.
So working at night is not so bad once you get on the schedule, but it definitely took a couple days for us to adjust our sleep patterns so that we were waking up at the right time. We start working at midnight and we stop at noon. And then the other team takes over starting at noon and they end at midnight.
Yeah, and so I came from California, so I had to adjust to Europe, the day shift to start out with so we could meet everybody and do all our trainings. Then I transitioned to the night shift. And then I caught COVID and I was in confinement. And so I had to transition to the day shift so that they would feed me. And then I transitioned back to the night shift. So I had a lot of flip-flopping, but it's okay. It's all fun.
But as you probably heard earlier, no matter what time of day you're working, there's always meals being prepared, hot meals, so we can eat lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. No matter when you're working, there's always meals available for you. One of the other questions we saw was how many different experiments are going on the ship. So we have about 30 scientists that are here as part of this expedition, and every single one of the scientists is responsible for conducting research based on this these cores that we're recovering. So we will have a minimum of probably 30 different types of specialties and projects that are being developed. Some of them will be collaborative, will be integrated together. But there's lots of people with different expertise. And so we have a lot of independent projects that are going on of these cores and probably some very big collaborative integrative results as well.
it's a really nice opportunity to learn from everybody. A lot of the methods that we do on the ship are all, tried and tested, and there are technicians that really know exactly how to run everything. And so we sort of learn and we get trained on that to make sure everybody, no matter what your level of experience, knows what to do. And then there's some flexibility to what we can do. So Clara suggested some particular experiments that we're doing in our lab, which are really nice additions.
The other question we just saw is, what do people do off their shift? So as you can imagine, we're here on the ship. You can't go an infinite number of places, but there are a few popular places people go. On top of the bridge, there is what we call the roof deck or the steel beach. It's not a real beach, but it's just the metal surface, and there's actually lounge chairs up there. So if it's a nice sunny day, we can go up there and you can enjoy the sunshine, you can sunbathe a little bit, enjoy the fresh air and the view.
Yesterday we saw a lot of pilot whales outside. It wasn't sunny, but it was cloudy and misty, and there was a huge pod of pilot whales. If you're on Twitter, you can see that on the JR Twitter feed.
Some other places that are popular off shift is there's also a helideck at the back of the ship. For emergencies, there's space to potentially land a helicopter for rescues. But at the moment, it's partly storage and partly just a large space where, again, people can go and walk outside in the sunshine and get some fresh air. So that's also a nice space where people spend some time. We also have a movie room and a gym. And so there's places there where people can also go and get some entertainment and relax together.
Today, Clara and I will be doing karate after our shift.
Oh yeah, we have a karate class.
With our instructor.
In the movie room. We move away the couches and we practice some karate. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The quarters, like, do you want to
Okay, sure. Yeah, our cabins are just behind us. They're pretty quiet actually, and we share a cabin, but we share it with somebody on the opposite shift. So we have the cabin to ourselves for 12 hours, so we can sleep, and then as soon as it's our time to go on shift, we leave the cabin for so it's a very nice space, and they do a really good job of making things comfortable for here. We have to make all our water on board. We had a tour of the engine room, and they explained how the ship runs on diesel, and that diesel obviously moves the ship around, but also generates the energy needed to desalinize seawater so that we can drink it, and so that we can use it for showers and things like that.
Yeah, so the rooms are small. There's bunk beds and 2 closets and 1 table, and that's it. And there's about enough space for you to stand and move a couple steps, and that's about all. So they're small but cozy, and there's enough space so that everybody has a little bit of privacy, a little space that's their own on the ship.
Yeah, and I say they do a good job. I mean, there's a reason we all signed up for this voluntarily, right? And we're happy to come back again if the ship was still continuing on, but unfortunately the ship's going to retire, and we unfortunately don't have a replacement, and we're getting really sad about that.
So we have 2 more questions that I see. One is, how long have we been on this expedition? We've been here about 7 weeks, and we're getting off the ship in about 2 weeks. So we boarded in Amsterdam on the 10th of December, and we sailed through Christmas and New Year season. And then on the 9th of February, we're going to get to Naples, Italy. Yeah. So that's the standard length of these expeditions. They're 2 months long. They plan to bring enough food for all of us to stay here for 2 months. The other question that we see is, what is our educational background? The scientists have a range of backgrounds. Some of us are still graduate students studying to earn a PhD. Some of us are after that stage. Sarah and I are both professors at universities, and there's people who are also very senior. We have even a retired professor, an emeritus professor, who's sailing with us. Yeah. So we have a whole age range, people who are still training and learning, and people who have been doing this for a long time. And that combination is valuable. We have new perspectives and shared ideas about a lot of the things that we're doing.
Yeah, and the ship is staffed internationally. And so, for example, for the US side, 2 of the spots are always reserved for graduate students, and the rest are usually postdocs or professors. So in terms of training, we all apply to the particular specialty, the room that we work in. So both of us applied with chemistry backgrounds to the chemistry lab. Others with sedimentology or 4M identification, like species identification experience, apply to those jobs. And then they train you. The staff that they have on board are really good, and they have all the methods worked out so that they can also train those that have less experience.
So sometimes we do bring experience that's valuable. And we also do have to learn new things on the ship.
Yeah.
There's lots of
I
instructions.
think it's pretty clear that all of us are learning on board. We're learning a lot of new tricks. So it's great. There was a question about downtime. So we do work formally 12-hour shifts. We usually actually work quite a bit longer than that, often 13, 14 hours because we're handing off. And they do have, like Clara said, lots of meal breaks. And we have cookie breaks as well. So we have time to make sure that we can rest a little bit so that we are safe to work, because obviously we're carrying heavy things around and doing stuff. So we do need to make sure we're rested. Thank you for your concern.
But we do not have weekends built in.
No, we don't
We
have
are
any
working,
weekends.
the ship is operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we're trying to maximize the science that we can get out of this time.
My least favorite email from staff at my university or students at my university is, enjoy your break, enjoy your weekend.
We don't have weekends here.
But I am enjoying my work.
There was also a question about the backgrounds of our
Yes.
educational outreach officers. Do you want to say what your background is, Kellen?
Sure, yeah. My background, I am a freelance artist. I'm a medical illustrator. So a lot of what I draw is life science. I sailed before on the JR as a student through JR Academy back in 2019. I was originally a biologist. That was my major. And then I met some outreach officers while I was aboard, and I was like, oh, so I can do science and art at the same time. So I'm going to do that then. And so I applied 3 times, finally got it on this one. And yeah, that's my background. The other outreach officer, she worked for NASA, Erin. She worked at MIT and NASA in Houston, and she has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. So really you can have a background in pretty much anything. We've also had teachers and videographers. The next crew, Expedition 403 has a documentary being made about them. So they have 3 videographers coming. So yeah, it's very diverse.
And then I wanted to add a little bit about subjects. So what we're doing is earth science. So obviously a lot of people have an earth science undergraduate, graduate degree, some slightly different majors. So for example, in school, I grew up in the UK. And so in schools, my favorite subjects were chemistry and geography. And nobody actually told me that there was something called geochemistry, which is what I do now, putting those 2 things together. And so when I went to university, I studied geography, which includes like human and physical geography. And I got more and more interested in wanting to use my chemistry skills and moved into earth sciences for my PhD. And so that was the moment when I moved from the UK to the US. I moved because, the US is a land of opportunity. They had really nice funding for the research labs. They had funding. I was paid to take classes, which I thought was amazing. So it's not a huge amount of money when you're a grad student, but it's enough to live on. And it was just like really an amazing transformation of my life. And then continued on to a postdoc and then got a faculty position in earth sciences at USC. And my name is Sarah Feekins, in case you want to look me up. And this is Clara Bletler at the University of Chicago. So we have web pages where you can find lots of information about us.
Looks like we have time for maybe one more question.
Ooh.
Yes. I don't know if we ever, the questions about connections with astronomy. I don't think we have astronomers who are sailing here, but there is a very important connection between astronomy and what we're doing, geoscience, climate science, and that over the past, a lot of our variations in climate have been controlled by changes in Earth's orbit around the sun. There's small variations, the Earth will tilt a little bit more or less, or the orbit will be a little bit farther or closer at different points in the seasons. And those small changes actually produce cycles in our climate that we can look at back in time. So there's a really nice connection between trying to understand the astronomical motions of the Earth around the sun and the record that's left on our climate. And of course, all of the other properties that we're understanding about our planet as a whole are very useful with exoplanet discovery, trying to understand their compositions, where their orbit sits, and how that might control their climate. And so there are some really nice connections between those two subjects.
And just to follow up on that, I think some of you may know something about it. So precession is the one that we're seeing. That's like the wobble of the Earth's axis. And that one's really important for pacing variations in monsoon rainfall in Africa. Of course, we're just off the north coast of Africa, as well as the Iberian Peninsula. So precession is a really important one if you want to look that up. And that has a time scale of about 20,000 years. So we're seeing a lot of cycles in the data that we're generating. We're not quite sure where we are in time, always immediately on the ship, but we have people that work very hard to find fossils that have bioevents, and we can find exactly where we are in time, and then we can see those cycles and line them up with the astronomical cycles, which can be calculated from theory, which is maths and a piece of paper. And Milutin Milankovitch calculated these by hand a long time ago, and they've changed very little, but we can do that more easily now. And then we're drilling into warm times we're really focusing on 5 to 8 million years ago, and precession is really important then. In some of the more recent drilling that was achieved by earlier expeditions in this region, they're really seeing obliquity. Obliquity is the tilt of the Earth's axis. So right now it's 23 and a half.
It's about 23 and a half now. Yeah.
23 and a half, but it
23 and a half is what it is now. But
Yeah.
that change in tilt, one of the ways I've heard it described is called nutation, as in not with an M, but with an N at the beginning.
Yeah.
Nutation and precession. So if you were to, the way I think of it is if you trace the surface followed by the sphere, it doesn't form a perfect cone, but it forms a corrugated cone. So the time scale of that fluctuation is a little more frequent than the 26,000.
Yes, and then if you think about the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle, it controls the length of the polar night over the winter for that hemisphere. And so and then conversely, it changes how much summer insolation you have, and then that affects how much ice you get building up. So that really controls the ice ages that we see in the last 3 million years. So we go in and out of ice ages repeatedly, about 50 times in the last 3 million years. We're pushing back to a time where there is no ice in the northern hemisphere, but there is still, of course, ice on Antarctica. And so what we're seeing mostly is precessional pacing and the variability of the records that we're seeing. And the other one aspect of the orbits is eccentricity, and that's just the fact that our Earth rotates around the sun, not completely in a circle, but that one is a very, very small difference in terms of the distribution of sunshine. The other two have bigger effects because it affects the seasonal distribution of sunlight and the latitudinal distribution.
So the last two questions we'll wrap up quickly. The results of this research are going to be continuing for years from now, but the IODP website does link to the scientific papers as they come out. So if you look back, you may see as the studies are completed, but it will take probably years of work for some of them to come out. And in general, yes, has gone pretty smoothly. There have been some mechanical things breaking, which is kind of normal, but we also have people on board who can fix them. So overall, we've been very lucky. We've got a lot of the records that we expected to get here. There's been some interruptions and delays, but overall, we've been very successful.